This is Nick Shalna, and we are so thankful that you are joining us on the Universe Next Door podcast. If you had not heard part one of this interview with Dr. Gary Habermas, make sure you check it out. It's on the topic of doubt and what we as believers are to do with doubt and how we handle it and those that we come in contact with. So please check that out, and please check out the Universe Next Door podcast. We'd love for you to subscribe to that, share it with a friend. You'll find more content and more interviews. And we hope that you find this interview with Dr. Gary Habermas on sharing evidence for the resurrection as beneficial as we did. Well, Dr. Gary, let me ask you this. In addition to doubt, and just so you know, we're in a Defending the Resurrection series right now, and doubt is, that's a huge part of the reason we're doing this, so I'm really glad that we got to cover this. But when we talk about doubt, what do you think, let's say you have a PhD, Mike, you're the president of a ministry, I'm a pastor. We've all put hours and hours and hours into studying. What do you say to the average Christian listener who they want to go and defend the truth of the resurrection? They want to share the gospel and see their friends saved. But what do you think is the biggest challenge they might face in trying to do that? Not having all of the education yet, not having maybe just started, let's say, a few years or even a few months into their Christian walk.
Yeah, I know a bunch of people who are really good and don't have any degrees. So you can't. It's not degrees, and I know you're not saying that necessarily, but a lot of people do it on their own, and they're very, very good at it. But the kind that write me, that really bother me, they get on your nerves. They're often emotional doubters, but here's what they're doing when they write to you. I've been reading Rudolf Bultmann lately. I've been spending a lot of time reading this atheist or that atheist, and I think I'm doing pretty well. But there's 8 areas where he's really getting me off my game. Can you help me with these 8? And then he tells me how much he's accomplished, and he's done 2, and he's questioning 8. So I have to write to him, and I'm going to say, it's irrespective of whether they have a degree or not. But I have to say to them, look, dude, learn not to read people that bother you. If they bother you and you can't handle the objection on your own, I'm not saying don't go to anybody else. But if you can answer 2 questions and you can't answer 8, don't read them until you got your emotions under control. Because all it's going to be is a roller coaster ride for you. I'm just telling you. All right, I'll do that. They write back 3 weeks later. Hey, can you answer these 3 more questions? I'm still reading this other atheist, and I'll say, stop it. Just stop it. Because don't study guys you can't handle. And don't talk to people you can't handle. You're not helping the cause of Christ. You'll come off looking like you don't know what you're talking about, and then they'll tell that story and maybe use your name. If you're a local pastor, this hurts ministry. So people like to jump in, and you know what they'll tell me? This tells you a little bit of, I'm not saying, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to say obsessive compulsive disorder, but it's a little bit of an obsessive compulsive personality type, not disorder. But what they say to me just makes me laugh. But I'll say, why are you reading him? Oh, I just want to get the best of the objections so I can answer the best. Well, you can't even answer I'm saying to myself, you can't even answer the easiest ones. So leave this guy alone until you can handle it. You got to work up. Yeah. You can't start on this guy. Yeah. So they jump in. They're just all kinds of mistakes people make. And then what the Christians, you guys started with this, what the Christians tell you is so misleading. Oftentimes they'll say, well, don't doubt anymore. Just stop and practice faith. Okay, that sounds wonderful. But I'll tell you what, it's not going to work with me. and the key women in my life, and I mean this with all my heart, the key 5 women in my life, and then, of course, I've got daughters, too, who are doing really, really well with the Lord. Every one of these women, they'll say, don't get me wrong, I'm happy for the evidence. I listen to the speaker that comes in and talks about creation, talks about what's wrong with genocide, how do we know Jesus is the Son of God, resurrection. I love them, but I don't need them. And I said to my wife, who's one of them, Mike already mentioned my wife. My wife and my 4 children died in 1995 of stomach cancer, but I'm remarried. And both the wives would have said this. I'd say, well, if somebody asked you a question you couldn't answer, it tore you up, would it bother your faith? and without, they just go, no, not at all. I'm secure. I'm not worried. I know I'm going to heaven. And I know what you guys are probably thinking. I think to myself, oh, if I could be like that and just have that kind of faith no matter what, but that's not my psychology. So, and it takes all types. And by the way, I'm not criticizing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that mentality is fantastic.
Sure.
Yeah. Right.
Well, with that in mind, I mean, you have written, I'm trying to phrase this question in the most careful and helpful way I can. You've written over 40
When you
books.
don't, I'll make fun of you
No,
for
that's
it, so
fine.
don't worry about
or
it.
maybe just shut me off and then nobody can hear me. So, I mean, you've written so much on the resurrection. You're coming out with a new book that's like a phone book. It's almost like as big as some of the books I've written. And so, I'm just kidding. I haven't written any books. But what do you, let's say you have like 20 or 30 minutes with somebody. You must have a few evidences that are like Dr. Gary Habermas's favorite go-to evidences. What might those be?
And we're doing the resurrection, right?
On the resurrection specifically, sure.
I mean, they're asking me about the resurrection.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I would give my minimal facts argument. And I can give it. I can state the argument in 1 minute. Now, it's going to take time for people to unpack it with me and ask questions, but it's not hard to state the argument. In fact, somebody just said in print the other day, and I didn't take this badly, they said the minimal facts argument is a very simple argument. They meant not simplistic, but simple because you can get through it very easily. And here it is. I will take facts which critical scholars take. I will treat the New Testament the way critical scholars do it. I will use data that they will allow and not use data that they don't allow. And these could be atheist, agnostic, avowed non-Christian authors. Often they're New Testament scholars, but they're not Christians. And I will take their facts and I will argue for. Lately, it's been a half dozen facts. I go from anywhere from 3 to 7 over 40 years, and I change that. You go, why do you change the facts? Well, not because anything's being disproven, because they're not all required in certain circumstances, or somebody wants to ask about 1 or 2 of them. But right now, I would use 6 facts, and I would say these 6 are established, and you're virtually not going to find a single scholar, no matter how liberal. They only have to be a scholar. They go, why do you say that? I don't mean you have to have degrees. They've got to know the territory. I prefer them to have terminal degrees in New Testament or something related. But you can't be a guy who lives in his parents' basement. I'm just giving a caricature of what you hear in the news today. A guy who doesn't leave the house. He's pretty old now. He doesn't leave. He's never studied, but he calls himself a scholar. And he's going to refute everything you say, and what he says comes out sounding like a tea kettle that's screeching. It's already boiling, and it's screeching. Mm-hmm. They're angry, they're mad, they put you down. And like I said earlier, I don't believe in the resurrection is not an argument. It's a it's a personal testimony that you don't believe it. Mm-hmm. And my response to you is, well, I'm sorry, I believe in it. Now, what does that do for you? Nothing. You're only saying you believe in it. And they don't even see that. All they did was deny it. I'm not talking about God. And then they go, by the way, Jesus never lived. Okay, right. Give me a break. Because even the skeptical scholars ignore those guys.
Right.
Bart Ehrman's written a book on it, going off on him. He's not the only one. Okay, so scholars, that's it. I'll use 6 facts that almost no scholar will deny any of the 6 facts, and then I'll say the best explanation for these 6 facts is that Jesus died on the cross, and I'll make it real simple. I won't even argue it's a miracle to start with, because that is a philosophical argument, takes other parameters. But I'll just say this man died, and later his friends saw him. That's enough. He died. You sure he's dead? Oh, yeah, we buried him. Mm-hmm. He's had the blood drained out of him. I mean, he's been dead in the way you bury people. And I'm telling you, a week later I saw him. Yeah, well, good dreams. It wasn't good dreams. Did I tell you 3 of my buddies were there with me? 6 of my buddies were there with me. Oh, yeah? Do you have a picture?
Right, and so the reason you're not going to bring up the resurrection is because that's a a theological, a philosophical claim, and you're really just trying to get what's the bare minimum place where we can find some kind of agreement from a historical standpoint. Is that right?
Yep.
And what are some of those, the 3 to 6 that you use?
And here's the two questions. Did he die? Yep. This is the skeptic asking. Yep. I don't even say was he raised from the dead. I say was he seen later? Was he walking and talking with his buddies later? It looks like it. Good. That's where I'm going with these 6 facts. Later, I'll talk to you about what Jesus said about himself. Is he the Son of God? Do we have a right to call him the Son of God? Is this just baloney? And did God do it? Because by definition, even David Hume, a miracle is an event caused by God or a supernatural agent. So that's what it is by definition. But that doesn't mean they happen. So that's a technical question. We get there later. But I only want to know, was this guy dead? Was this guy seen later? And I use their 6 facts and say, yeah, you're not going to get out of this one. Because I've got a number of unbelievers are friends of mine. Bob Price, John Loftus. They're friends of mine. They'll tell you they're friends. And I would say the same thing about them. And I'd sit down and push with them. I said to one of them, he's a big football fan, I said to one of them, the first time I met him, I said, I wished you lived next door to me, and I have the football package for my family. I wished you came over and sat in my living room every Sunday afternoon, and you and I could argue. I said it the first time I met him. And then I said, and let me tell you something. Someone's going to be converted after all this is over, and it's not going to be me. And the guy just started laughing. He thought it was really amusing. Not laughing like laughing at me. He thought that was, and that just hit us off on a friendship. So that's I take it like a football game or a hockey game. That's the way you play this.
Yeah.
Only it's with data and it's with lies.
And so the minimal facts approach will use these facts that are agreed upon by virtually all critical scholars. Things like Jesus died by crucifixion. His closest followers believed to have seen him, had an experience that they claimed it was seeing him. The skeptic Paul also claims to have seen Jesus and then began preaching a message. So this is what you're talking about, that many people are going to be surprised to go, wait a minute, this is historical fact. I mean, if we can call anything a historical fact, we can call this a historical fact. So what that show that I watched on the History Channel about did Jesus ever even live, that real critical scholars would all reject that. There are so many people in the church and non-believers also that have never heard this. And those goes to that intellectual kind of doubt. These factual statements. Jesus actually lived. Jesus died. This isn't disputed historically. It's not disputed historically that his followers believed to experience the risen Jesus. It's not disputed historically that they believed it so much that they were willing to preach a message with the central point being the resurrection of Jesus Christ and your faith therein, having the forgiveness of your sins. They were willing to die for this message. You've got the skeptics James and Paul converting, and this is not disputed historically. When I've used this, so when I came across this years ago, of course, because of your work and Mike's, I thought this was brilliant. Wow, this is a really helpful starting place, not just for the believers who have doubts, but in evangelism. Did you know this? What do you think is the best explanation of just these facts? And I thought it was brilliant. I've seen personally how impactful it is. Because it cuts through a lot of, we've all been in, these kind of apologetic and evangelistic conversations. They just go everywhere. They want to ask questions about this and questions about this. And they want to talk about, in Matthew, about people coming out of tombs. And they just want to go everywhere. And we're like, okay. Not that those questions are irrelevant. Yeah. But what about this? Let's start here. What do you make of this? And let's keep coming back to that. Now, there's been some... So I think it's brilliant. I think it's very helpful. And when I came across it, I did not think that what you or Mike or anybody else that ascribes to the minimal facts theory, what you were teaching was only use this. Don't ever use any other approach. But recently it seems like there's been some criticism of the minimal facts approach, saying that we need to go for a more inclusive, a cumulative facts approach. And there's been some criticism of it. Now, I think it's misplaced, but I would love to hear from you. Are you insisting that both in scholarship and in personal evangelism, only use the minimal facts approach and don't bring anything else in.
I wouldn't
Is
even
that your
dream-
position?
I wouldn't even dream of saying that. In fact, my teacher, my TA, my research assistant, who has a PhD himself and did both his master's and PhD dissertation on the resurrection, he has a book he's proposing now with a baker's dozen of reliability for the New Testament arguments. He gives 13 arguments for reliability, and they're all different. It's a brilliant little. He does a PowerPoint on it, and you get through it in an hour. So you can give it to a lay audience, but it's really heavy stuff. They have to listen, but it's really detailed. And that's my position. I mean, he and I have worked together for 8 years, and minimum facts is one of the 13. So there's 13 ways to go after it. And if somebody goes, your thing is way too narrow. Now, Craig Blomberg's 850-page book on the resurrection, that's the way I go. And I go, well, good. If you can talk to a guy on a bus for 15 minutes and cover 850 pages, you go for it. If you want to do reliability, do it. You want to use archaeology, go for it. There's a lot of things you could use. No, I'm not opposed to using other things one little bit. But I'll tell you what, the minimal facts is the simplest, probably, approach-wise. It's the fastest. It cuts through things. And many people who like the other longer kinds still acknowledge that the minimal facts are knockout arguments in situations XYZ. In fact, if you guys know the philosopher Angus Manouge, who used to be Angus Manouge was the president of the Evangelical Philosophical Society for years, and he's a PhD philosopher, and he was reviewing something I'd written, and he said Gary Habermas's minimal facts argument. I love this phrase. He said it removes boulders behind which atheists hide. So if the minimal facts argument uses facts and disarms the person, here's a trend that we see coming. Very few, and I keep emphasizing, established scholars with terminal degrees in a relevant area. We're not talking about those who get angry and go off on Jesus, period. That they're not in view here. I'm not saying there's no answers, but there's a lot of answers. There's too many, but I'm not dealing with them. Today, I'm getting ready to publish on this. There seems to be a shortage, if you're a critic, there seems to be a shortage of critics who are willing to take one alternate theory, and stand on it. They don't do it. In fact, two of the biggest just passed away. Garrett Ludeman, who took the hallucination theory, and John Shelby Spong, who took, well, it's hard to name his theory, but he believes only Peter had that experience, and it was transferred to everybody else. They both have passed away in the last year, and they're two of the main ones. Notice they're very elderly, because in elderly times with elderly people, those guys have been around, and those theories, they could do it, and it'd be harder to respond to them with a plethora of data. When you can narrow down the facts and nail them on it, here's what most critics are doing today. It's like this. No. I don't take any one theory. I'm going to give you a shotgun thing, because if A doesn't work, B will. If B doesn't, J will. And they want to be able to go up and down the list. And I think the reason they want to go up and down is because, as Bart Ehrman even says, when he was a Christian, when he was an evangelical, he used to love people to take naturalistic theories, because he would have them in the corner in no time, and they wouldn't know how to respond. He said, "No, I wouldn't do that now, because I don't think I was doing the right thing." But that's what's happening with the minimal facts. It removes these boulders that people were real happy to hide behind and say, "What I think happened was blank," and now they're just going, anything works but resurrection.
Well, it's a helpful tool, because in a very confused time where people have access to all of the ideas of all time through their smartphone, right? Living in a very pluralistic society, people have these kind of quilt, if you will, worldviews. They have just combined beliefs from all over the place, and people are in many ways just very confused about what is real and what do they even believe. So a tool like the minimal facts approach, I think, is very helpful today because of its simplicity, and it allows you to gain some clarity and find a helpful starting place in a relationship with somebody to really discuss the truth of the gospel.
Well, I also just wanted to jump in real quick and say that if you have not read The Case for the Resurrection, this is the book where you can find the minimal facts argument. Please read it. It will literally change your life if you haven't studied the resurrection. And if you have questions or doubts, please read The Case for the Resurrection. And Dr. Gary, while we have you just for a couple more minutes, I wanted to ask a couple questions from listeners. A few years ago, there was a panel where you and Jordan Peterson had done something at Liberty University. And I remember you made a funny comment after he had spoken a little bit about the resurrection. You said, "We'll get the resurrection straightened out at lunch." Now, do you mind if I ask what that conversation was like?
Yeah, I was with Jordan that day for about 3 or 4 hours.
Wow.
And it was nothing like a normal conversation like, "Well, what about this theory? What about that theory?" He was super, super open. And the way the relationship started was about a year before that, if I remember. He tweeted, or one of those forms of mass media. He republished a 3-page argument for the resurrection, minimal facts, that I had done in a book. And he took the argument and put it on his site, and he said something like, "This may be the most important question I've ever entertained." Now, I don't think he meant my article. I think he meant the general question of resurrection. But so the conversation started, Nick, by him saying, "This is where I'm real interested." And then he asked me, "Would you do a podcast with me on the resurrection?" And he asked me. So we've never done it because days after that happened was when he announced to the world that he'd gotten sick with
Right.
Well, yeah, and then his wife had cancer, very serious cancer, and they were put on the shelf for a while. Now he and I have corresponded since then, but I'm not sure that podcast will ever happen. But we had a very fruitful conversation. But Nick, not like the kind where I was twisting arms or pulling teeth. I was saying things like the minimal fact stuff, and he would just respond like, "Yeah. I've got to do more thinking about this. That's really good." That's what I remember about the conversation. It was definitely not antagonistic, but it wasn't even what if. It wasn't even that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he strikes me as someone who's, of course, I don't know him personally, just what I see publicly, is somebody who's very intellectually honest, that he's almost like a slave to his ideas and must follow them where they lead. And in a sense, that's an admirable quality because for many people, right, our emotions and our volition gets in the way, and it's more of we're afraid of what's true, we're anxious about what is true, and that distorts our view of reality. But just the example that Jordan, I think, can set for many people is pursue truth, follow it where it leads you, and submit to what is true. And of course, as Christians, we hold that in Jesus Christ is the ultimate source of truth, and we are to submit to him as Lord. So I don't mean to take more time, Nick. I know we're wrapping it up, and you got some things there. So
No, I would agree with you 100%. He really, I'm indebted to him in a lot of ways, and I'm also indebted to Dr. Habermas here in a lot of ways. It's just thinking is so important, and it's something that we have to do more of. We have to think on our own and follow the evidence where it leads, which is why we're doing this series. And Dr. Habermas, if we could just do one more question, what is your interpretation of the 1 Corinthians 15:29 passage where Paul says, "Now if there is no resurrection, what will those do who are baptized for the dead? And if the dead are not raised at all, why are people baptized for them?"
now, is this your question, Nick, or is that from an audience?
That's
someone
my
in the audience?
question. That's my
okay,
question.
all right.
But I'm a listener.
All right.
I listen to these programs after I publish them.
My take on that is based on the fact that Paul never brings it up elsewhere, never encourages anybody to do this, never says, "Don't forget now you got some dead relatives you need to be baptized for." And since he doesn't do that, and since it would be a very important topic if he did believe that, I think what he's doing is he is what today we would call refuting a person from their own presuppositions. I think what he's saying is, look, you guys have issues, and verse 29 follows verses 12 to 19. And in 12 to 19, he's been saying, what is a resurrectionless Christianity? And his answer is nothing. There is no Christianity. Well, what about the crucifixion? Sorry, you're still in your sins. If there's no resurrection, there's no Christianity. In fact, verse 19, 10 verses earlier, says, we are of all men most miserable. But the reason he's saying this is because the Corinthians had issues, and if you read the scholars, there's about a half dozen major views as to what they think was going on with the Corinthians. Most of them say they had the Greek view that spirits could live forever, but bodies couldn't live forever. That's one of the options. But Paul's arguing against their view that the dead aren't really raised, and that would at least mean they're not raised bodily. So then when he gets up to verse 29, what I think he's saying is, hey, wait a minute. This is your problem. You don't think people can be raised and so on. So why are you being baptized, or maybe not you, but whoever it was they were talking about? Why are they being baptized for the dead if they don't believe in a resurrection? I think he's saying it's a circular argument. You're refuting yourself. It's self-referentially an error. And someone said, well, that's an easy comment because that's kind of like what you believe. I'm going to say, well, it looks to me it's like what Paul believes, because Paul never brings it up again, never encourages it, never. I think he's just kind of saying you guys are inconsistent.
I really think that's a great answer. And Dr. Gary Habermas, thank you so much again for sharing your wisdom with us. And thank you for listening to the Universe Next Door podcast. Please subscribe and share it with a friend to find more interviews and content. And we're so grateful that you had spent this time with us. We'll see you back here next time on the Universe Next Door.